Good morning from Evanston, Illinois. My name is Virginia Lee, and I'm on the faculty at Garrett in the field of Christian education, and I'm Director of Deacon Studies. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this first event in a series of events to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Order of Deacons in the United Methodist Church. This celebration is a collaboration of Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary, the Deacon Order Chairs Planning Group, and the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry. We are very excited about this morning's inaugural Crain and Seymour lecture by Dean Mary Elizabeth Moore. And just as an aside, these three persons, Margaret Ann, Jack, and Mary Elizabeth, have been so important in my religious education and deacon journey, and I am thrilled to be here with all three of them today and with all of you joining us. I want to remind you that there'll be another presentation this afternoon at 4 p.m. Central Time by Dr. Margaret Ann Crain, a worship service this Saturday, and a social justice panel on Saturday, April the 24th. More information is available on the Garrett website. I also want to thank a few other folks who have helped make these events possible. Special thanks to the Deacon Order Chairs Planning Group, and one of those persons is Leo Yates, who is signing for us today. Thanks to the Garrett Communication Office and Shane Nichols, and to Garrett Connectional Learning and Dr. Mark Teasdale. But I especially want to thank Daniel Skelton, who is our webinar support person this morning. We appreciate him and all that he has done and is doing to make this event possible. Okay, just a couple of logistical things. Deacon Leo Yates, as you can see, is doing our interpretation this morning. And to make sure that you see Leo, you need to choose the speaker view in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Also want to let you know that we hope to have time after Dean Moore's lecture for some questions. You should see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and that's where you can enter your questions I'll be moderating that box, and I'm helping to moderate that discussion. Again, welcome. We're delighted you are here, and I will now turn it over to President Javier Vieira.
Good morning, everyone. I am so happy to be able to welcome you to Garrett from Garrett, and particularly on this very special occasion when we honor the work, the service, and the legacy of two beloved former faculty members and two leaders and visionary academics and practitioners in the field of Christian education. Margaret Ann Crain and Jack Seymour have each left an indelible impact on this seminary, and the endowed lectureship that we launched today honors and recognizes that impact in the lives of the generations of students that they've taught here, in the ways that they've kept the fields of Christian education and deacon studies and practical theology at the forefront of the seminary's commitments and concerns, and in the way that they extended themselves professionally and personally and spiritually beyond Garrett-Evangelical in service to the church and to the academy and to the needs of the world and its people, which was always the point and the purpose of their work and their true passion. So this endowed lecture series seeks to keep their work and commitments at the forefront of what we do and who we are. It will enable alumni, students, friends of the seminary, and the entire ecumenical community to engage with the leading thinkers and practitioners in Christian and religious education. And it will continue Garrett's commitment to strengthening and resourcing the Order of Deacon in the United Methodist Church and the Order of Deacon across the ecumenical community. The Reverend Margaret Ann Crain is Professor Emerita of Christian Education at Garrett and also served as Director of Deacon Studies here, affectionately known as Dr. Deacon because of her devotion to the work and the Order of Deacons. but also for helping the church understand and appreciate and deploy the gifts of deacons and the historic and the ancient role that they've played in the life of the church throughout the ages. Her work gave voice and visibility and articulation of purpose and impact to the new order. And this work has proven prescient, for we see now that the church has never needed deacons more, and that the work and the role of the deacon seems almost designed precisely for the moment that we are living in, an order designed precisely to connect the life and work of the church with the life and the needs of the world beyond the church's reach and impact, an order of ministry embedded in the vocations and settings of quotidian life, meant to give visibility and presence to the church in the lives and experiences of people at the margins, of those most vulnerable, of those who the world has targeted, of those who the world has too easily forgotten, and of those who are in need of healing and expressions of grace. Dr. Crain, your life's work lives on at Garrett, and we're happy to honor you and to keep the passion that you have for this work as central to our work, to our identity and purpose as a seminary. The Reverend Dr. Jack Seymour is a giant in his own right, not simply because he's Margaret Ann's husband. Jack is Professor Emeritus of Religious Education at Garrett, as well as a former academic dean of the seminary and a renowned Christian educator. I was thinking about this last night as I was preparing for today, and I realized, given that my own field is religious education, that I don't think I have taught a course in which there hasn't been at least one reading from Jack Seymour on the syllabus. Jack and Margaret Ann both did their doctoral studies at Peabody College at Vanderbilt, and Jack then taught at Vanderbilt Divinity School, at Garrett Graduate School, and at the Chicago Theological Seminary before coming to Garrett in 1988. His passion for educating Christians and for strengthening the educational ministries of congregations helped define the field, literally, and his work soon became the standard, required reading across the world of theological education. Perhaps most importantly, Dr. Seymour has been a mentor and guide to countless professors of Christian education and to practitioners in the field. Even before I came to Garrett, I can't tell you how often I would meet colleagues and friends who had been mentored or deeply influenced by Jack and his work. And perhaps that influence has been most deeply felt here and endures here at Garrett. Jack's love of Garrett and his commitment to its thriving is well known and deeply appreciated by colleagues and students alike. And his influence and impact here continues to this very day. And it's for this reason that I want to pause for a moment and to recognize a special gift that we have given Dr. Seymour. Jack, in recognition of your service as academic dean and for your many years of service on the faculty from 1988 to 2014, we have belatedly gifted you with a Garrett-Evangelical Captain's Chair. This gift is an expression of our deepest gratitude for your service, for your care for this community, and in recognition of your voluminous scholarly work and influence that has so shaped the field of Christian education and has so deeply impacted Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary. Every time you sit in it, I hope that you will sense the love, respect, and gratitude of this community for your life's labor. Thank you, Jack. Lastly, I know it's not my role to introduce our guest speaker, but I have to very briefly just say a word of gratitude to my dear friend and colleague, the Reverend Dr. Mary Elizabeth Moore. Dean Moore will be more appropriately introduced in a moment by our own Dean, Dr. Mayan Latron, but I want to thank Mary Elizabeth for being with us today. I want to thank her for her friendship and support of me during the years that we served together on AUMTS, and for honoring us as a Garrett community as the inaugural Crain Seymour Lecturer. Mary Elizabeth, welcome to Garrett, and thank you.
President Vieira, I want to thank you and Dean Tron and the faculty for the chair. As we all know, it came on Saturday rather than this morning. So it means that I've had a chance to see it, unpack it, and sit in it. And it is delightful. It is a beautiful, beautiful expression. And I thank you so much for a seminary that I care so much about and I love. Friends, since Margaret Ann is speaking this afternoon, she asked me to start this morning and to accept your thanks for the inauguration and endowment of this chair. You all know how much the two of us witness, love, and respect the witness and mission of Garrett-Evangelical. We want to thank all of you, our students, our friends who have contributed to this endowment, and we are pleased that a robust conversation about Christian education will continue into Garrett's future. I could not make any comments this morning without mentioning that all of us in Christian education stand on a proud heritage of people who came before us at Garrett-Evangelical. People like Grant Shockley, Dorothy Jean Furnish, Doug Wingeier, Taylor McConnell, and our beloved Linda Vogel, who addressed race, gender, culture, theology, and interfaith work in our learning. This legacy is proudly and significantly continuing in the folks that are there now, and I thank them for their work. And may this lecture, honestly, help a robust conversation continue into the future. Thank you all very much, and God bless you all.
Well, greetings, Garrett community, friends and partners. My name is Mai An Tran. I'm the academic dean at the seminary, and it is my great honor to introduce to you the distinguished inaugural speaker for the Crain and Seymour Endowed lecture today. Professor of Theology and Education, Dean Emerita of Boston University School of Theology, and ordained Deacon of the United Methodist Church, Reverend Dr. Mary Elizabeth Moore. Given the unique intersectionality of the Crain and Seymour Endowed lecture, the weaving of engagement in Christian religious education and deacon studies, there was but one person that we knew we had to get for this occasion, and it was Dr. Mary Elizabeth Moore. Now, in this one person, we find a trailblazer or standard bearer for both the deep study and lived praxis of religious education, theological education, practical theology, process thought, social justice, and the ordained ministry of word, service, compassion, and justice of deacons and diaconal ministers in the United Methodist Church. With a career spanning over 50 years, starting way back in 1967, comprising teaching, ministry, scholarship, presidencies of academic organizations, and directorships of leading edge centers and programs, Dr. Moore is the author and co-author of 6 books, all of which have become classics, co-edited, 4 volumes, no fewer than 50 book chapters, and 35 academic articles in premier journals. I can go on, right? An advisor to over 30 PhD students, many of whom would later become renowned in their own right. Mary Elizabeth Moore has become a subject of study for theses and dissertations these days. She is perhaps the gentlest giant one would ever find in the academia. Now, she's also the most unassuming radical and savvy mover and shaker within the church. Her extended service to the denomination includes many years of service as a delegate to general and jurisdictional conferences and as a member of boards of ordained ministry. Her work has put her right in the front lines of many important denominational decisions. As you will hear later today, she is credited for enduring strategic advocacy for diaconal ministries in the UMC, and the rise of the Deacon's Order is attributed to her legislative genius at the General Conference of 1996. Above all, those who know and admire Mary Elizabeth Moore would all agree that, as one biographer puts it, she is simply, purely a master educator whose work arises from and contributes to a concern for repair for the world. or tikkun olam. As she wrote in her book, Teaching as a Sacramental Act, also a classic in the field, quote, "The heart of sacramental teaching is mediating the grace of God through the concrete stuff of creation for the sanctification of human communities and the well-being of God's creation," end quote. We are grateful that Reverend Dr. Dean Emerita Moore has made time to mediate grace with us today. So without further ado, let me present to you Reverend Dr. Mary Elizabeth Moore.
Thank you so much, Mayanne. I'll never live up to that introduction. I'll turn it all back to you, who is you're such an outstanding human being, educator, dean, leader. Thank you, Mara. The Crain Seymour Lecture has been founded to honor two remarkable people who have worked side by side, synergizing together and apart, gathering stories and ideas, creating models and programs, caring for their children and grandchildren, mentoring students and peers, and anchoring both Christian religious education and diaconal studies. Garrett-Evangelical has been their home, and they have helped make Getz a home for countless others, leaving their marks on people's lives and on their knowledge, character, and creativity. I am grateful, very grateful, that Getz has established this lectureship in their honor, because they deserve it mightily, and the lectureship will continue their legacy far into the future. I'm also honored to be invited to share the first lecture in honor of two people I greatly admire and love. This occasion is also a celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Permanent Order of Deacon in the United Methodist Church. About 8 years after the establishment of the diaconate, I was invited to a think tank gathering in Nashville to reflect on ministry with church leaders and theological educators. The person who called the meeting and chaired it had been an ardent General Conference opponent to the legislation to establish a permanent diaconate and to depart from the two-step ordination. Many of the people in this meeting had also opposed, and some of them presented papers in this very meeting. I began to suspect a plot. At one point, the leader said that the time was probably ripe to reconsider the diaconate and the decisions of 1996. My stomach tightened because the gathering included so many critics. I also knew that my word would be seen as overly partisan, so I waited a breath. A bishop of the church listened to the conversation for a few minutes and then said, "The church has already made this decision, and we're already living into it. I do not see any point in continuing this conversation about structure. Let's turn to visions for more visionary ministry by all of us." In those few words, she called us back to the center. Later in my room, I thought maybe when we reach the 10-year mark, we would have a stronger witness to the power of the diaconal ministry. At that point, we still had diaconal ministers as well as deacons. And it did. Then the 20th anniversary marked a real sense of wonder as new deacons, almost 2,000 by that time, entered ministries with homeless teenagers, elder care, homeless shelters, work training, chaplaincy, and ecological advocacy. We were visibly becoming what the order was created to be. And as Margaret Ann points out in her book, The United Methodist Deacon, we were becoming even more so when in 2012, the General Conference added two critical descriptors to the ministry of deacon: compassion and justice. That language was actually discussed before and during 1996, but many discouraged us from including that language for fear that people would quickly complain that those are ministries of the whole body of Christians. They are, of course, But deacons have a role to inspire and lead the church in such ministries. And I heartily join Margaret Ann's celebration of this expanded description of the deacon. Now, at 25 years of age, deacons and the order are at another celebratory marker. And I think the bishop's words are meaningful for us yet again. We continue to grow stronger as new deacons, class of new deacons enter, and long-term deacons continue to reimagine the possibilities for serving a hurting church and world. I don't know any deacon who has not reshaped their ministry with the unique, distinctive call of deacon in mind. I'll thus focus my presentation today on remembering and reimagining, giving attention both to the diaconate and to Christian religious education. I seek to take on the challenge that Margaret Ann and Jack have set before us, focusing on 3 paths of ministry and education that have been critical to them. You can move the slide now, Daniel. The first path is the path of following Jesus. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. The second path is the path of living sacramentally. And the third path is personal and social holiness. So the path of following Jesus. Following Jesus begins with God's incarnation and incarnational mission. Both Jack and Margaret Ann have emphasized following Jesus at the heart of ministry and education. Jack's recent book, Teaching the Way of Jesus, emphasizes the transformative power of following Jesus. He also emphasizes the importance of historical and theological study to understand what following Jesus really means, and the potential of Christians partnering with people of goodwill and other faith communities to work for transformation. He further says that the Jesus way is the mission of Christian education. He recognizes, however, that the Jesus way was not clean and easy. He says, Jesus taught people how to live in an oppressive and conflict-filled time, pointing them toward the realm of God. Can you imagine any time more than ours in which oppression and conflict are soaring and sinking our world? Jack further recognizes that the disciples carried on the teaching of Jesus because they wanted the world to know about Jesus and his way. Margaret Ann writes of deacons who draw their primary inspiration from the ministry of Jesus. His washing feet, healing the sick, spending time with outcasts. Neither Jack nor Margaret Ann is pointing to a trivial detail here. They are asking Christian deacons and teachers and other ministers to ponder deeply on the life of Jesus. I suggest that this calls for remembering, meditating on Jesus' life, and recognizing Jesus in our midst. I'll invite you into each of these 3 movements with poetry, which I have discovered is vital during this particular period of time when people have suffered greatly and in some cases see no end in sight. Daniel, you can leave this slide on. So the first movement of practice is remembering, which includes the historical and theological study that Jack describes. Remembering is poring over biblical texts, studying the biblical worlds, and analyzing the Jesus stories that we inherit in order to glimpse the incarnate Jesus whom we seek to follow. The more we study and remember, the more vivid are the narratives and interpretations and the more questions we have. I love the Jewish tradition of not trying to settle an interpretation, but live in the wrestling. And we are invited by Jack to live in the wrestling with narratives and interpretations and questions. These mark the beginning of our understanding. At a recent graduation ceremony at Hebrew College in Massachusetts, I was processing in a line beside a trustee of the college. When he learned I was a Christian, he said excitedly, "I love Jesus. I could even be a Christian if it were not for all the ways that Christians have distorted Jesus." I was struck by his comment, identifying with it and wishing that we Christians had not distorted Jesus in so many ways. Following Jesus requires us to discern what we are able to discern and to follow the compassionate, justice-bearing Jesus who is revealed to us in scriptures and critical scripture study. This kind of remembering is hard, but it's fruitful work, as I seek to convey in the poem that I will read now, entitled, "Do You Remember?" Do you remember the stories of long ago Jesus people? Stories of Jesus teaching in stories and posing questions, sharing food with thousands and fishing with friends, praying in the wilderness and stopping on the way to teach and heal. Stories of Jesus sending out disciples. Stories of Martha preparing a meal for Jesus and her family, and Mary sitting at Jesus' feet to wonder. Stories of Martha imploring Jesus to come and heal Lazarus. Stories of children gathered by Jesus, seen by Jesus, dignified by Jesus. Do you remember stories of Jesus receiving the cares and questions people brought to him? Their yearnings for healing, guiding, and loving, their passion for action, whether touching Jesus' garment in hope of healing, bathing his feet with rich perfume, traveling with Jesus on the long road to Jerusalem, or going out where Jesus sent them. Do you remember the vision spun by Jesus in his last days? A vision of doing unto others who are hungry, thirsty, naked, sick, and imprisoned. Seeing Jesus in them and serving Jesus by serving them. Do you remember the ancient stories of Christians gathering and sharing all they had? To live into and out of the Spirit of Jesus in those early days of forming church. Do you remember the early Christians who shared different roles in order to be whole as followers of Jesus? Do you remember how Jesus served and how service blossomed among Jesus' people? If you can remember, you can imagine a world that is yet to be. And now I shift to a second practice that's important to following Jesus. This is meditating on Jesus' life. In Ignatian spirituality, or in that of Julian of Norwich, meditation is critical. For both Ignatius and Julian, the visions sought primarily are those of Jesus on the cross, or the suffering Jesus. Rebecca Parker and Rita Nakashima Brock several years ago pointed out that the cross was late in becoming a central Christian symbol, but rather a living tree was a dominant symbol. They even subtitled their book to mark the shift from a focus on life to one on death. The title of their book, Saving Paradise: How Christianity Traded Love of This World for Crucifixion and Empire. I remember years ago in my journey through the catacombs that I saw no carvings of crosses on the stone, but repeated carvings of Jesus, the Good Shepherd with his sheep, Or Jesus sitting at table with 3 or 4 others? Care for the sheep and the sharing of bread were central symbols. I am proposing not only meditation on Jesus, but meditation on the life of Jesus as a pathway to following Jesus. I communicate this meditation in a poem that I call Seeking the Jesus of Galilee. I seek to know you, Jesus, as you lived, with friends gathered round the table or seated on the ground, listening and learning as they broke bread with you and walked by your side. I seek to know the closeness of you, to hear the sounds of your prayers, laugh at your humor, and hear you laugh at mine, ponder your wisdom, dropped into casual conversation. I long to walk with you on the dusty road, to stand or sit beside you in a crowd when a woman touches the hem of your robe and you feel the power flowing from you. To see your face as you watch a crippled man lowered through the roof by his friends. To feel your smile when the Syrophoenician woman beseeches you to heal her son and corrects you when you insist the blessings are for your people and not for hers. As some people long for a vision of the crucified Savior, so I long for a vision of your face and hands as you heal the people who came to you, or you proclaimed that their faith had healed them and the ones for whom they came. I seek to know you, Jesus, as you lived, to breathe your spirit of gentle strength and probing wisdom, to discover the joy of being with and living for others, to be transformed by the holy presence of you. So my being, my presence, can witness to yours. I seek visions not in my eyes alone, but in daily companionship, witnessing to the love that you lived, the love you want for me. Meditating on Jesus' life is more than a warming spiritual practice. It is a pathway to communion with Jesus, immersion in his life. It is the pathway toward following Jesus, and it's a promising practice for deacons and for all Christians to learn and practice as it draws us into silence, images, stories, and presence. The third practice in following Jesus is recognizing Jesus in our midst. Jesus is more than an historical figure, but is a living presence in the world, living within and all around us, but also in the peoples and realities, even the hardest realities of this world. We are reminded in Matthew 25 that Jesus is in the people who are hungry, thirsty, naked, sick, and imprisoned. Jesus is among us in those who serve and those who are suffering violence and abuse. In all of those, we name George Floyd, and I invite a moment of silence for you to name some of those people. I write of this as seeking Jesus across the road, across the room. Across the road, across the room, I see Jesus again and again. and a father rising in the night to care for his crying child, and children laughing as they hide and seek, a neighbor bringing food when someone is ill, a mother working day and night to feed her family, trans persons making their way in a world that does not, will not, refuses to understand. I see you, Jesus, across the room, across the road, across the country, across the world. Jesus moves in people acting for good, to support co-workers struggling with illness and angst, to rally political systems and peaceful protests to change forever the needless, deadly use of force on people whose skin is brown or black, to protest abuse of a 65-year woman or a 75-year man beaten by another for being Asian, to protect vulnerable people from hunger and loss of homes and support their self-protection. Jesus is present wherever people of compassion seek to sustain the throbbing of life. Across farms and towns, wild places and urban centers, Jesus dwells in the pain and abuse and struggle, and a person whose addictions have erased all semblance of hope, in towns suffering endless illness in the shadow of pollution-spewing factories, in children abandoned, left to their way without family, and children not abandoned, but abused and neglected within their families, in religious, ethnic, cultural communities battered by decades and centuries of oppression. Jesus is alive in all those who struggle and yearn for life. Jesus dwells in the world, in the neighbor and stranger, the enemy and friend, illumined in every act of compassion, groaning in the plight of a struggling creation, present in the very longing for life. The Spirit of life is known by many names and is known to me as Jesus. Following Jesus is following in large footsteps, that we travel with others, other Christians, other deacons, and the very presence of Jesus as we move into the unknown future. Reimagine new possibilities. And now I turn to a second pathway, paths of living sacramentally. The second path hallows the sacredness of God's creation and God's presence throughout creation, together with God's call to mediate the sacred with others. Both Margaret Ann and Jack recognize the importance of sacramentality and evocation, a prominent theme for both, especially as Margaret Ann writes of the ministry of deacons. Here I'll also draw on some of my own earlier and more recent work. In teaching as a sacramental act, I describe the human calling, as my aunt has already quoted, to mediate the grace of God through the ordinary material of creation, to the sanctification of human life and well-being of all creation. You can flip the slide. There we go, thanks. Thus, sacramental living is the human vocation, and it permeates teaching and learning and the ministry of deacons. Indeed, as Margaret Ann claims, deacons are called to a ministry of embodied sacramentality. The emphasis on living sacredly, and I use the term sacredly here instead of sacramentally, which is a distinctively Christian term, the emphasis on living sacredly is widely shared with people in many other religious traditions, albeit in different ways with different languages and meanings. I had the privilege of sitting with a group of Hindu students at BU this week who led a session on Hindu healing practices. 4 students had prepared short presentations on practices that were meaningful to them, diverse yogic, ritual, and musical practices. Then others added what they had experienced at those practices and what they wondered about the practice. I was interested by the way that the students repeatedly named their mothers and grandmothers as the ones who had taught them or who reminded them to practice during the stresses of another COVID semester that was haunted also by anti-Asian violence. I was moved by the power of the sacred in these young people's lives, including those who said they were not actively practicing Hindus, but they were totally alert. The spiritual practices attuned them to the sacred, which was healing for them personally and for the larger world around them. I've also done a recent study of image of God in Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, discovering that with some significant differences, all 3 traditions emphasize that people are created in the image of God. And all 3 draw from this image an accent on dignity for each and every human being. When you place the central value of human dignity alongside the creation stories and God's clear valuing of all creation, you have a glimpse of a sacramental universe. You can turn the slide now, Daniel. Oops, you can go back. Thank you, Daniel. Here we find the values shared across traditions and motivating people across traditions to work together for the common good, as urged by Jack Seymour. Here we also find a key to diaconal ministries of word, service, compassion, and justice. The value of dignity is essential to service that matters, for it honors the recipients and participants in the service with dignity. Dignity is also essential to compassion and justice. Without dignity, compassion is shallow and objectifying, and justice can be mechanical and superficial or short-term. The very recognition that God indwells every human being and that each and all are created in the image of God becomes the ground from which word, service, compassion, and justice can grow and flourish. Turning to Christian education, you can move the slides now, Daniel. And in these 2 slides, I'll give you a chance to read and absorb. You see the ministry of 2 deacons in the Boston area who I see as embodied sacrament. Read the quote from let me open my screen a little bit bigger so I can read it to you. The quote from Ashley Renee Johnson. She describes her mission in life is to help young people, especially children of color, to flourish and to encourage them to listen for and respond to the voice of the divine as we all work toward greater peace and justice in our communities and in the world. Next slide, please. And Adama Brown Hathaway, who is working as an advocate for LGBTQIA people within the United Methodist Church, who serves her diaconal ministry as a manager in United Way, and who serves her local church as a minister of connection and care. These are embodied sacramental ministries of the sort that Margaret Ann describes and narrates. Next slide, please. Turning to Christianity, sorry, a little bit of liquid here. Turning to Christian education, I've previously described teaching as a sacramental act. You can move the slide now, Daniel, thank you. Making a case that God calls us to live sacramentally, thus we are called to do everything in our lives sacramentally, thus we are called to teach sacramentally. Drawing from Sacramental Theology, I identified 6 practices that are critical to sacramental teaching, and they're on the screen. Expecting the unexpected, remembering the dismembered, seeking reversals, giving thanks, nourishing life, and reconstructing community and repairing the world. I'm presently working on a project on sacrality and revolution because I'm convinced that a sense of sacredness underlies the deepest and most earth-changing revolutions. Here I want to emphasize the relationship of the sacraments and sacramentality to the ministry of deacons. I think this is a set of questions that needs much more development in the future if we are to understand the sacramental ministry of all people, the role of sacraments in magnifying sacramental ministries of all, and the role of deacons in signifying and embodying sacramentality in all aspects of their ministries, as well as in their particular roles in baptism and Eucharist. I would say the same for elders. In the first 5 centuries of the Christian church, deacons had major responsibility for baptism because this marked the entrance of people into the church. They regularly assisted with the Eucharist as well. Indeed, there are 4 historical acts in the Eucharist. Thanks to Don Salyer, we have a simplified language for these. Take, bless, break, and serve. The deacons were seen and are seen as essential to the taking, receiving the bread and cup, and setting the table. And in the serving, sharing the bread and cup in the service of worship and taking it to persons unable to attend. If we deacons saw our roles in this way, we would take much more initiative in preparing the feast and serving it to the community at the conclusion of worship, thus stretching worship into the world. In the Anglican Church, the ministry of the deacon is understood as a sacramental ministry. Consider the common definition of sacraments, and you can change the screen now. Oh, you can leave it. Thank you very much. Consider the common definition of sacrament as an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. Deacons' lives are to be an outward and visible sign. Everything we do in ministry is to be an outward and visible sign. I would say the same for laity and the same for elders. The sign does not point to our goodness and gifts, but to God, who is the source of all that is, who graces us with life, and who gives us these precious ministries in the first place. All Christians are to be signs, and the fruitful ministry of deacons can magnify and support that sense of living grace in others. That is our vocation. I earlier gave a down-home definition of sacraments, and you've now heard it twice. You can change the slide, Daniel. And you see it at the top of your slide. What I want to do now is to separate the 3 main points here in relation to deacons. Deacons are called first to mediate God's grace in everything you do, everything we do. whether tending a dying woman or ministering with her family, whether serving food to a homeless community or helping them discover and realize their hopes, whether counseling young people in a residential treatment home or advocating for children without health care. These are all ways that deacons mediate God's grace. We do this through the ordinary material of creation. We mediate God's grace through food and clothing, job placement services, counseling programs, political structures, hospital visits, mission trips, child advocacy programs, war protests, classrooms, prison ministries, music, and liturgy. This is the ordinary stuff of our sacramental ministries. Finally, deacons engage these ministries with hope that by the grace of God, they will be fruitful in the sanctification of human beings and the well-being of God's creation. We hope that the food we offer will fill deep hunger, that job training and political advocacy will help people rebuild their lives, that mission trips will make physical and spiritual differences in human lives and in the land destroyed by hurricanes and fires, that classrooms will be places where wisdom grows and lives are transformed, that music and worship will bring people together to celebrate God and God's world, that our work for environmental awareness will reduce global warming. That has to be stepped up quite a few notches. Our work for radical environmental change will reduce global warming, that our work to build peace will lead to war no more. This is sacramental ministry. It is a sacramental ministry of the deacon, who is ordained not only to engage in such ministry, but also to inspire and equip the whole church in sacramental ministry, embodied sacramental ministry. And now we turn to the slide and the last of the paths, the path of personal and social holiness. These are accents lifted by both Margaret Ann Crain and Jack Seymour quite a lot. They draw from their Wesleyan traditions here, as do I. But the values of personal and social holiness go back to the early church, where both individuals and communities were urged to follow in the Jesus way, recognizing the holiness of their lives and their vocations, to grow in holiness throughout their lives, and to engage with others to recognize the holy in the ordinary and contribute to the transformation of the world, responding to harms that have been done, violence and abuse beyond imagination, and responding to hopes waiting to be born. I will not elaborate on personal and social holiness here, but I name it as a path that focuses on a way of being in your life. It builds directly from the understanding of sacramental living that I've been exploring, while turning a bright light on the being of Jesus and the being of Jesus' followers. To make peace in the world requires that people develop a sense of inner peace, and they approach peacemaking with peaceful means. To build justice requires that people continually fine-tune their internal sense of injustice and justice, and they employ just means to build justice. To deal with white privilege or racial hatred, for example, a person needs to come to terms again and again with their own relationship with privilege and hatred. And they need to go deep in analyzing and reshaping the communities and societies in which they live. We live in a world where violence is personal. It is personal for Asians who are knocked down in the streets. It is personal for African American young people who are killed at traffic stops or at arrest for a $20 forged bill. We live in a world where we have to take stock of our ways of being and the ways of being in a world that needs us to be for compassion and justice, personal and social holiness. I conclude again with a turn to the journey. You can turn to the last slide, Daniel. Thank you. All three paths call up images of life's journey and John Wesley's urging to grow toward perfect love as long as we live. Perfecting in love. On this journey, we know three things. Jesus is before and with us. God's creation is sacred, as is our vocation in creation. And we simply need to put one day in front of another as we seek to live holy lives for the flourishing of this amazing creation. The best of all, God is with us.
Thank you so much, Dean Moore. I want to remind everyone that there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have questions that you would like to ask, please put your questions in that Q&A box. While we're waiting, let me just make a couple of comments. I saw from some emails and from your comments, I apologize that there was some communication said we would begin at 11 today. Some communication said we would begin at 11:10, and I apologize for that. Let me let you know that we have recorded the event, and after all four of the events, after the April 24th social justice panel, we will upload all four of these videos to a location where you will be able to access them. And we will send the link to those videos to everyone who registered for the event. So I apologize if you missed the beginning of the lecture or the beginning of the event, but you will be able to see it on the recorded video. So I apologize again. Also want to remind you that we will continue, as I said, some folks may not have heard this, this afternoon at 4 o'clock. Okay, I'm seeing that someone's saying they clicked on the Q&A and it's not working. If it doesn't work, you can put it in the chat. Okay, we do have a couple of questions now, Mary Elizabeth.
Okay.
The first one says, can you explain the difference between a Christian education director and a deacon who serves in Christian education in the church?
Oh my. First of all, I have to say that at the bottom, there's no difference. At the bottom, our ministries, our mission, our ministries of all of us are called to ministries of service, compassion, and justice. The deacon has a responsibility to the church and is held accountable by the church. So there's a kind of relationship. A deacon also is part of an order and therefore receives the wise counsel and support of the order, and sometimes reminders to shape up. Not generally one-on-one kind of reminders, but just reminders that the church is really in need at a particular moment in time, and it's time to step up. So that kind of relationship is critical. I would say that also our deacon is called to really take seriously all four of these words: word, service, compassion, and justice, and to shape that person's ministry accordingly. So that I know many deacons who've been deacons for 20 plus years and who actually have changed their focus over time because of taking that mission seriously. Having said that, the director also is called to such a ministry and is also doing that. The deacon is called to give leadership for the whole church to be engaged in ministries of word, service, compassion, and justice. But that is not so different from the director either. So I wouldn't make such a sharp distinction. I was featuring the diaconate today, and I believe the diaconate has been, will continue to be, and is a vitally important ministry for the church. I also think the same for elders and local pastors and laity of all varieties. And I don't believe that, I think people have different callings, and I know people who do the same things I do as laity with the same amount of dedication that I have, because their sense of call is to be lay, to witness to the ministry of laity. My sense of call is to be deacon, to witness to the embodied sacramentality of the deacon. But when you get right down to it, the most important thing is that we're all in this together. And the distinctions can get in the way.
We have another question that asks, could you comment on the role of forgiveness of self and others in the work of a deacon?
We've just come through Holy Week, and because I'm in the process of writing a book of meditations, I dwelled pretty heavily in Holy Week, and I dwelled heavily on the cross and what is known as the 7 words of Jesus from the cross. They come from different, they're a mix of quotes from different texts, but the first word in the Gospel of Luke is forgive them, for they know not what they do. And Luke portrays Jesus as a compassionate, caregiving, justice-bearing God-man. And how fitting to his gospel that Jesus would begin his words from the cross. I wrote a poem on this, but even in the midst of of his suffering, and even looking at what was going on around him, that he would begin with, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I'm helped, I'll be quick. I'm helped a lot by Marjorie Suhaki on the subject of forgiveness. She makes a case that forgiveness is not about letting something go or feeling good about a person or condoning what they've done. You may still feel anger, hurt, all kinds of emotions, but forgiveness is wishing the best for the other. That kind of forgiveness is very powerful for all of us to envision and practice toward. So I think forgiveness, I almost included it actually, I think forgiveness is a vital aspect of following Jesus and of living sacramentally.
Okay, we have another question. Says, given our Wesleyan traditions of social and personal holiness and the sacramental nature of diaconal ministry, can deacons make a special contribution to our understanding of the sacraments by highlighting their prophetic nature?
Amen. Amen. The question already has the answer. That is our vocation. Yes.
Kind of related to the prophetic nature, the question that says, I'd like to hear more about employing just means to establish justice.
I've been part of many organizations, I think probably all organizations, take shortcuts in order to do what they think is going to be just. And the goals are often very admirable, but shortcuts often do injustice to people along the way. And those injustices seep into our being as individuals and as institutions. And they undercut the justice toward which we're moving. I'll give an example in our current world. One of the problems we have with the phenomenally large percentage of police violence against brown and black bodies is that very often the cases that come before the authorities are swept under the table. And in the name of doing justice and trying to build just systems on some kind of macro level, people are performing injustice and therefore creating systems that cannot sustain justice. My son is a police officer, so I had no massive belittling of police. That in itself can be an injustice. But I do believe that our militarized police systems are unjust, and that to repair those requires us to face them, to analyze them, to draw upon the wisdom of all people involved in order to create something that is truly just and that continues to become ever more just over time.
We have a question about, in your experience in these 25 years of the Order of Deacons, how have you navigated this, the remaining, helping persons understand deacons and the difference in elder and deacon and how that may be perceived, the perceived hierarchical nature that some persons experience orders. How have you navigated that?
I think that's a we question. How have we deacons navigated it? And I think the first way we've navigated is to embody deacons' ministries. And the second way is to explain and interpret. But I think the embodiment is 1,000 times more effective than the explanations. Both are needed, but I think the embodiment is far more effective. So I know clergy, elder clergy, who were very much opposed to the creation of a permanent diaconate, and who did not want to have a deacon in their church. They didn't want to have anything at all to do with it. And circumstances happened and they ended up with deacons in their church, or one or two. And suddenly they've become advocates for deacons because they recognize that the teaming of deacons and elders and laity together, which is the strength that we carry. The teaming is incredibly important. And I want to add teaming between deacons and deaconesses as well. We're in this ministry together, and this ministry is urgent and vitally important. And in order to do it well, we need one another. In order even to glimpse and analyze the reality, we need one another. So today you heard some of my perspectives, but people in this group had different perspectives. People who were listening had different perspectives. How are we ever going to learn, and how are we going to ever create anything approaching a common good or lean toward God's kingdom if we're not doing it together? So I think the biggest hope for the deacons is what Garrett is already doing. And that is recruit, build, continue the excellent program you already have, and then send deacons out into the church and world to do the amazing work, the amazing ministries that they do.
Thank you. I want to add here, if you are a deacon or someone who is searching more information about deacons, there is a Facebook United Methodist Deacons site where you can find information about affinity groups that are being sponsored as a part of this 25th anniversary celebration. They've already started a few weeks ago, but they will continue for the next few weeks. And they are affinity groups for particular persons in particular areas or ministries, where you'd have an opportunity to be in a small group with other persons interested in the kind of ministry that you are interested in, and be able to ask questions and talk about that. So I encourage folks to look for that, or if you can't find it, I think when you registered, my email address was given you as a connection. So please email me and I'll be glad to put you in touch with that.
I might also add that Garrett-Evangelical has done this well for years. We're noticing at BU that the number of people entering the diaconate and the excitement of these people is growing. And that's beautiful to see. So simply letting the ministry of deacon grow into the fullness that God only can bring about is powerful.
Well, thank you, Mary Elizabeth, for this opportunity to hear you, to celebrate the work and ministry of Margaret Ann and Jack, and for this beginning celebration of the Order of Deacon. I want to, again, a couple of announcements or just reminders that there will be Margaret Ann's lecture on the history of the order is this afternoon at 4 p.m. Central Time. And again, these events are recorded and we will post that. So thank you all who have joined us today. And also, just as a reminder, Daniel Smith has posted in the chats about Garrett Library has a resource guide on deacon and diaconal ministry resources. So you can find that at the Garrett Library site. So again, thank you to everyone who has been a part of today's event. Thank you, Dean Moore, for being our inaugural lecturer. We are thankful for you and your ministry and work. And we look forward to seeing all of you at some of our events later in the week or two. Thank you.